Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence with psychiatrist Bernard David Beitman, MD. Dr. Beitman is the founder of the Coincidence Project. The project encourages people like you to tell each other coincidence stories. To learn more about Dr. Beitman's work, put Connecting with Coincidence in your web browser. You'll find his book, his Psychology Today blog, and the interviews from this podcast. And now your host, Bernard Beitman, MD.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am Bernard Beitman, MD. I study the mind and the brain in its physical and cultural context. Meaningful coincidences like synchronicity and serendipity provide clues to how our minds and our brains connect deeply to our bodies, other people, nature, and our environment. Meaningful coincidences happen in all aspects of life. To notice them, you just got to need to expect them. You got to see maybe they're going to happening. And part of what we're doing here is saying, hey, come on, listen to this because you'll see more coincidence as a result. You can pre-order my new book, Meaningful Coincidences, is due out in September. There's what it looks like back there. The full title of Meaningful Coincidence, How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. It's coming out in September. The order links are in the text below. And this is the first book to put synchronicity and serendipity together. These two groups tend to not believe in each other for various reasons, but they have something in common. I try to be able to say what that is. My story for today, I title, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. Okay. Sometimes people show up in meetings wearing the same colors, almost the same outfits. One person says to the other, I guess you got the memo, which means telling you what to wear. These paired outfits often get amazed smiles, but not always, and in this case, maybe it didn't. While at a conference, a colleague of mine shared a glorious romantic first day with another attendee. As darkness fell, the relationship sifted into discord. The next day, each of them wore a black outfit with a little white in it. For him, this fashion coincidence signaled that the relationship should continue. For her, it turned out it meant the relationship was finished. The mostly black outfit was assigned to her of mourning. It was over. One person's grateful amazement can be another person's burden. The relationship did not proceed. Our guest today and I have come together through a little serendipity in our neighborhood. We have one of those neighborhood little libraries, take a book and give a book, a little box with books in it. So I was wandering around looking for something, and this one tends to deliver really good stuff for me. And it's a play with coincidence to see if there's something there that matches what I'm looking for, what I would like. So I found this book, this one right here. And started having a little communication because the author was very reflective, we could say. Her name is Natasha Joukovsky, and she's the author of The Portrait of a Mirror, which is her debut novel published by the Overlook Press in 2021. Her work has appeared in the Common Electric Literature and Necessary Fiction, and she's got a newsletter named Quite Useless. It just happens to be after Oscar Wilde's all art is quite useless. I mean, she plays with words in ways that, well, you'll see. Natasha holds a BA in English from the University of Virginia and an MBA from New York University's Stern School of Business. This is another one of her polarities. She spent 5 years working as a docent in Philadelphia Art Museum and no,
not a docent. I was on the business side. I was in membership.
I always imagined you from the book to be showing people around. Oh, you were in the business side. Oh, so you were that person. I forget her name. Anyway, we'll leave her out of this for now. So you're in the business side. So I was imagining her being a docent, showing paintings around, but she learned, she somehow picked up a lot about art. So she went from the business of art to the business of business which wasn't as big a pivot as I thought it was, but still a big pivot. And her book contains marvelous descriptions of artwork and the relationship to reality, our reality, and some top 1% or less than 1% New Yorkers, Wall Street types kind of thing, and their relationships. I mean, it's so funny and so reflective, and so many mirrors, And narcissism is a key part of this whole thing. So Natasha, it's been a pleasure talking with you by email and stuff, and reading your book twice. And now we had to stop talking with each other so we get to this. So please tell us a coincidence story, Natasha.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be on with you after our email correspondence. My coincidence story is actually surrounds my novel. So the hardcover that you were holding there a minute ago came out last June 1st, 2021. And that date, it turns out, was also my wedding anniversary 8 years earlier in 2013. So my husband and I got married in 2013, June 1st. The book came out last year, 2021, June 1st. And because the novel is about narcissism and weddings feature very prominently within the novel itself, including there is a New York Times article within the novel that I based on my husband and my New York Times article that was published in 2013, right after our wedding. My husband joked that with my book coming out on our anniversary, I was remarrying myself. So that's the first coincidence with June 1st, but it gets better because a few weeks after the book came out, another author reached out to me, Luke Burgess, who, and through an editor at Coviture who was writing a review of my book and also reading his book at the same time, she noticed a lot of coincidences between the two works, even though his book is nonfiction. It's called Wanting, and mine is a novel. But the parallels she just thought were too good. So Luke and I got connected through her, and then read each other's books at the same time while communicating and messaging each other, with our minds just exploding with the number of coincidences between his work and mine. And specifically, what Wanting is a really elegant digestion of the philosophy of Renee Girard in a way that makes it much more approachable to an average American reader. Girard originally wrote in French. The translations are pretty convoluted. I read Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, which was Girard's first book after reading Wanting. And look, between the original and the elegant synthesis, I almost fell off the floor several times with how perfectly Girard's theories mirrored the psychological experiences that I was trying to convey in The Portrait of Amir. And Luke's book, Wanting, also was published on June 1st, 2021.
Lovely. The June date. And to me, it's that you're both reading the same each other's books, and you're seeing the parallels as you're going. So there are stories of people having dreams together. This is I like the real life ones even better, and that's what you were doing with him. So I don't hesitate to say that you were mirroring each other.
No, we weren't. And we absolutely were. And we discovered we both live in Washington, DC. So he ended up he was doing an event for his book, and I was in conversation. He asked me to be in conversation with him. So we've gotten to do an event together and, get to know each other in person. We've become friends, which is very lovely. And he's, introduced me to other Girard scholars, which has gotten my book into its absolute most unexpected cross-section of fans that I never could have anticipated, which is Catholic professors. I have I got all these Catholic professors following me on Twitter. I was not thinking of Catholicism at all when I wrote this book. I have absolutely no connection to it, but the secular parts of Girard's theory and, his psychological insights are, folks, and particularly one of these professors that I've gotten to know best through Luke, Trevor Cribben-Merrill, who's also the author of a brilliant debut novel from 2020 called Minor Indignities. I've learned from talking to him, so much more about Girard's impact on the world, and that he has been for many novelists a productivity or a creativity killer, because he explains the reason for writing novels for some people.
For our audience,
Hmm.
what you're doing is very meta. It's about these guys, and it's the kind of thing that you like because you're so meta. And I can do anything meta than you is like one of the lines that people like to say. And I am a metaphysician,
Yes.
physician who's very meta.
You are a metaphysician. Oh, that's so good. That's my favorite sort of, pun and wordplay. That's too good. Too good.
I'm glad you like it. I'm glad you like it. So we've been doing a lot of meta here and nobody knows what you're talking about.
I'm sorry.
Because you got these names and these people, you're all excited about it. And this is in your mind that you're playing with it. And I can see the enjoyment you have. And I like being there with you and talking with you in your mind about it. But what are some of the things that Girard wrote that were practical? Because I told you I play a little football and baseball, and I got to have my cleats in the ground, and you're practical too. So what are some of these things that were so overlapping with you?
Yeah. So Girard's thesis in Deceit, Desire in the novel is that the great novelists reveal the imitative nature of desire. And
wait. What is the imitative nature of desire? What does that mean?
That our wants are not spontaneous. We learn what to want.
Yes.
From looking at what other people want.
Yes.
And that is the center of my novel, and that is the center of Girard's theory. So I apologize. I should have mentioned this.
Of course you should
sooner.
have, yes. But that's okay. That's my job. Is like I like listening to. I would get into your mind too, and that's like fun for me, but it's not for our audience.
Yeah.
Without going to too much detail, one of the main characters, Dale, I think, buys an apartment in New York City.
Wes, but yes.
Wes, Wes buys an apartment in New York City that is like to be shown to other people. So the real estate agent makes him believe that this is what he should want because to show it off, because that's what he should want. So what we want is what we're told to want.
And specifically, it's imitative, right? That we want to be like other people.
Oh, not told, but what other people.
No, it's not you're not told. You want what other people want.
As they are demonstrating by their behavior. So it's
their behavior.
It's like
they're modeling.
It's the kids modeling after their parents. It's not what you say. It's what you do. And I'm really very much interested in seeing more lately how people tell me things, particularly they're going to do something and they don't do it. I mean, this seems to be more endemic in the environment than it was before. People used
That's
to
right.
be people of their word. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, particularly with mimetic theory, which is that idea.
Memetic means copying.
Mimetic means copying and imitating specifically.
Imitating.
And that our desires specifically are not spontaneous, they're oftentimes based on coincidences. A really great example of this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Virginia Postrel's excellent work of nonfiction, The Power of Glamour. But one of the,
The power of glamour.
Yeah, she tells this story about a prima ballerina who grew up in poverty and, happened to like get her hands on this magazine with an image of a ballet dancer on it. And that image, wanting to, the glamour of that image and wanting to imitate that image and be the person in that picture, put out determined the whole course of her life. And, all the decisions she made came back often to this image that, she ran into by chance, and that just absolutely stole her heart. But that wasn't a spontaneous desire. She specifically wanted to become another. So mimetic desire is always the desire to be another. And that other was a ballerina. And that, that metaphysical desire informed her real world decisions. So
doesn't that image have to match something in her when she sees it?
Maybe not. What if she saw an image of a gymnast instead of a ballerina? Don't you think that she could have?
Well, she had some kind of general form in her mind of wanting to excel as something that required some movement, is what I could suggest.
Maybe, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that chance plays a really big role.
I'm into saying, yeah, this stuff happens. There's all kinds of things happening, but what you, let me say, resonate with has something to do with what you bring to the circumstance. It's not just that you're a blank screen, a tabula rasa, and the stuff comes right into your head and you become it. There's got to be some form frusta, some form in there that it fits. That's what I think.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that that Luke Burgess talks about with, he has an anti-mimetic newsletter and
anti-mimetic,
yeah, because mimetic
like
desire can be really dangerous.
That's not anti-emetic. Okay, anti-emetic. Okay.
But mimetic desire can be really, really dangerous, and part of what my novel illustrates is how dangerous it can be, and that anti-mimetic tendency to we do have some control over how we, who and what we choose to imitate. That is absolutely true. But at the end of the day, we're almost always imitating somebody or something, someone else.
It requires an ability to be critically thinking. So we see in this culture right now, a lot of people taking guns because they have somebody else that they're copying and don't have have a way of critically evaluating what's going on. So there's a range at which we pull in or allow in those images from other places, other people and pictures to then influence us. When I was trying to be a football player, there was a guy named Tommy McDonald who played for Oklahoma, who was a wide receiver, and the way he ran and what he did is what I wanted to do, which I did. I became kind of like what Tommy McDonald did. I copied my coach in learning how to bunt. So there's a very important part of wanting to pick it up from somebody and having the ability to be able to pick it up and then carry it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. The gun crisis that we're facing is, a lot of things, but among them, it is a mimetic crisis.
It's a mimetic crisis. It's a lack of critical thinking in the mimetic crisis. So we're talking about Girard and desire, and what we were talking about there is a mirroring thing, where see that, I want to be that, mirror, mirror on the wall, I want to be the fairest of them all in this way.
Mhm.
Well,
And usually specifically, so with the mirror thing, and this gets into, and Girard talks about this, this is one of the things that I was trying to get at in Portrait, is that one of the people that you can ultimately want to imitate is yourself. And specifically,
now wait a minute. I want to just say, I want to slow down about that one. One of the people you want to imitate is yourself.
Yeah.
That's taken me a minute to like get clear.
Well, let me explain it.
Please do. I know you will, but I just wanted to pause for it. Okay, go ahead.
So this gets to what we were talking about before we went on video, with the idea of interpersonal recursion, and that, the desire, our modern desire, which I think is exacerbated by social media and just the constant influx of selfies and images of ourselves, and looking at yourself on Zoom. But we often are not thinking about, what we're thinking about. What we're thinking about is how what we're going to think and say will be perceived from the other person. And this is a recursive then phenomenon where that goes, to absurdity, where, I'm not thinking about what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about what you're going to think I'm going to think about and say. And then I say something that is influenced by what I think you think I'm going to say. And you get into these chains. The perfect example of this is that scene in The Princess Bride, where the man in black and Wallace Shawn's character are having their poison duel, and Wallace Shawn's character is going through all of the the mental gymnastics, trying to think of like, but I can't drink it because you would think this, and and that's a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about with interpersonal recursion.
Now, I think you've taken that to an extreme that I don't agree with. I think it's a continuum, because I learned to call people politicians versus scientists, just as a way of thinking about how they operate. And the politicians are much more tuned to what you're just talking about. What's going to be the impact of what I'm talking about? It's almost like they don't care about what they're saying. They're caring about the impact on the person. On the other end are people like with Asperger's, who just can only say what they're thinking. And they don't have much of an idea about their impact on the other person.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all. I absolutely think it's a continuum. What I would say is that I think that social media has pushed the average on that continuum farther toward politicians. Obviously, I'm the first to agree that there are scientists out there. You saw me start to wax on Girard without any thought to whether my audience would understand what the heck I am talking about. I probably, to be honest, I don't know where I fall, because I often think about these things, but then I also can just completely have no idea. Maybe I'm trying to, but I just do it wrong.
I mean, it's fun watching you think, but that's what you were doing, and experiencing you thinking, that's what you were doing. But yes, you got it. You were caught up in your own thing, because you weren't thinking about, hey, look, what about these other guys? And my job is
these
to
other
say,
guys. But I mean, to bring this back to, how you mirror yourself is to close that loop is, when you're taking the politician's angle, and I'm going to reuse this because I actually love the continuum of scientist to politician on this, but when you're trending more politician, particularly in, amorous affairs of the heart.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Right.
Oh, darling, I love you so much.
There is a difference between, loving someone and, desiring deeply for them to desire you.
Yes.
And what the portrait of Amir is largely about is the difference between love and the desire for someone to desire you. And that is also what, where the extremes of Girard's theory go to, in, predicting the behaviors that my novel then illustrates in, nonfiction form, the behaviors like, being a coquette and pretending, feigning lack of interest, right? And that being an attraction technique. And, but when you're the desire for desire causes folks to, imitate themselves. They are their own model, and they want to become the model, this ideal person, which is ultimately a play for immortality. They want to be a god. They want everything to be easy, and for this sort of adoration. And of course, that is a huge theme of my novel as well, are desires for immortality, and specifically immortality through art.
They are, I think I was following that, but the desire to be the ideal you have for yourself. I think you were trying to be able to say, you're trying to imitate this image you have of yourself, which somehow you also, let me say, conflates with what you think the other person will find
Correct
to adore you with.
Yes.
When you're talking about imitation of yourself, it's this ideal of yourself that you're trying to imitate and be able to get to. Okay, I didn't get I didn't get that part of it. The narcissism, which now you are making clearer how it happened with social media, is getting more and more rampant in the world, I think, and certainly the United States. The amount of self-involvement people have is amazingly different from when I was growing up. It seems to be that way.
Yeah. It's not new, it's exacerbated.
It's exacerbated.
Right?
Oh yeah.
It's taking, social media didn't invent narcissism. It hacked our brains to make it so much more prevalent. I was talking to another novelist who's writing a piece on social media in recent, and how different recent novelists have handled social media. And one of the things I said to her is, narcissism is not new. It's been around for millennia. But the difference today is Narcissus stumbled upon that Stygian pool in the woods, not totally by chance, right? Because he had some help from the gods, but he stumbled upon it in the woods, and it was like a Narcissus problem. We all walk around with these Stygian pools in our pockets. And
let's pause for a minute. Stygian pool is where, if you can see it on this in the front of this, there's a guy looking at himself in a pool here, and this is the pool that Natasha is talking about. He fell in love with his own image, and he didn't know that it was his own image. So he was frozen there and didn't want to move, which was a problem for him, and being able to not be able to know that he was going to be able to take it with him. He knew he couldn't, so that in not taking it with him, he had to stay there. And so he was frozen in time, and that's what the painting shows. But now, as Natasha is saying, I can look at myself right now talking to Natasha on Zoom, and I say, well, look, what is that? What's that red
what's
there?
Going on here?
What's that?
Getting older every day.
That's right. Gotta go with the same thing here. What can I do about that? Well, not much. That's what it is. But maybe I can do something else to make it reach my ideal. So we can see ourselves much more, is what you're being able to see. But what you're adding is that we fall in love with ourselves and want to be an ideal that we can portray on social media, and then want to be able to act like that. So that's the desire that we have now, the desire to be this ideal, which then we think will attract somebody else to us.
None of that's new either, though. Like
No.
that, I mean, Proust, Gerard picks, I think it's like 5 novelists.
Let's not do the history of that.
Okay.
Let's just say it's here because
It's here more. Yes, we can
it's
just
here
say
more.
it's
That's
here
all.
more.
That's all. Let's do it. It's here more,
Okay.
because let's do coincidences, because you and I
Okay.
can get you and I can get into this too much. It's like too much fun, but it's not what we need to be talking about, because you have such good ideas about recursiveness and fractals. But let's start with a pun that you threw at me, which I hadn't thought about. One of my problems with talking about coincidences with people is that the word coincidence doesn't really tell you what it is particularly. It says is it meaningful or is it not? And there's some people who say it's random. Okay, so it's a mere coincidences. For some people, it say it's means something, so it's a meaningful coincidences. But Natasha has pointed out, punster that she can be under the right circumstances, that mirror and the way you pronounce mirror is like mirror. I mean, if you listen to yourself,
Yeah,
you say mirror. There's an O in there before the last R.
mirror. Yes,
That's the one. That's the one. You don't do that. You go mirror. So you've put them together already. So mirror coincidence is a meaningful coincidence usually, or can be, and mere coincidence is definitely, it's just random chance and it doesn't happen. So we've been talking about the play with puns. Tell us about puns and coincidence, Natasha.
So I think it's not so much puns that fascinate me as double entendres.
What's a double entendre, Natasha?
Yeah, a meaningful pun that is a little bit naughty. and so
a little bit
so
naughty. No, you can't do that it's for you. Me, you can do that, but not our audience. That's a little bit naughty or naughty. Okay, so what do you mean by a pun that's a little bit naughty?
Well, that it has some. It's a mirror coincidence as opposed to a mirror MERE coincidence, I guess. That it has that it has something to connect it beyond pure linguistics.
Yes. Besides the sounds sounding the same.
The sound, yeah. The inherent sound similarity, the inherent echo doesn't interest me as much as that when the echoes themselves are connected. But it kind of goes to one of the most interesting observations that I think you make in your book, which is that as soon as you understand the reason behind a coincidence, it is by definition no longer one. So I think I don't know whether these are actually they're coincidences only insofar as there is a grain of mystery left. So you need some meaning explained, but you also need some that remains unexplained. And I think that, why I'm less interested by pure linguistic puns is that there's too much that's unexplained around the coincidence. And why I love kind of double entendre puns is there's just the right mix between an explanation and meaning, and yet remaining mystery and dissonance.
Very good. And like with mirror and mirror, they have the same sound. And so you wonder about how it happened that these two different words and with different meanings ended up having the same sound. And we don't have good explanations for that. It just kind of seems to appear. But what they do is demonstrate a polarity in themselves, that it's diminished, or it's like, wait a minute, potentially meaningful. But then we don't know just what those two words mean when they apply, or how they apply to something. So there's something satisfyingly ambiguous about that connection, is the way I'm understanding you telling me this.
Yeah. And it has just the right amount of ambiguity.
Just the right amount, but there's something to it. I can use it just
something you can grab onto, but also something that you can, there's some negative space left to it. Negative space is a big,
what's that mean? What's that
big
mean
idea
here?
of mine.
What's that mean here?
In the novel, that there's something that's left unexplained. There's
yeah,
that kind of corner of mystery. Yeah.
I like mystery for all of this. That we're trying to peer outside of our current reality and see what's out there.
That's
And
right.
like stick your nose above the clouds and see what might be there.
Mhm.
Well, one of the original titles of your book was Recursion. And then the fates slammed you with a book called Recursion, a novel. And you spent some time languishing and anguishing about your title being, let me say, stolen by somebody else. There is this thing with words that, or ideas, that sometimes you come up with a great idea, but someone else either had it already or has it now or will have it. And I had that with the word simulpathity, where I made up a word simulpathity, meaning feeling the pain of a loved one at a distance. And I thought, well, it's in 2014. So I looked it up, went back and looked it up in 2016. Some guy made a movie entitled Simulpathity, a little one, 2-minute thing. And I wrote to him on Facebook, said, hey, did you ever hear of me and my word? And he said, no, and he used the term in the little movie the same way I meant it. So I get into this psychosphere idea that we're sharing ideas with each other, but we don't know it. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that's what we've got. So we live in this mental atmosphere. So as your husband told you, you're lucky, and I agree with him, that you didn't title your book Recursion. So what?
I agree with him too.
So what is recursion? We don't know. You're going to tell us. But Portrait of a Mirror is like, that is such a nice title because there's several good novels in the past that are part of the mirroring of your book. And if those of you who ever had the experience of being between two mirrors, that's what we're talking about here and about to talk about more, is that you look in one mirror and then the other mirror reflects back what's seen in this mirror in front of you, and you get this infinite regression back of mirrors back. And that's recursion in the very simplest form. And that's what Natasha was writing about in her novel, Portrait of a Mirror. So tell us about recursion and fractals, which are an important part of coincidence understanding.
Yeah, so specifically what my husband said when this other novel called Recursion came out was, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you. Your novel isn't about aliens, which is, there's this science-y
the previous novel was about recursion? The recursion novel was about aliens?
No, I don't, his novel isn't about aliens either, but just, it has this, science-y, feeling and connotation, and is, maybe a little bit of a word that's hard to approach, that a lot of people don't know. It probably would have gotten changed by a publisher for my book anyway, given what it's about. But the Portrait of a Mirror in plain English gets to the central image of the novel better, which you already described, of standing between two mirrors and seeing that infinite interplay between the progressively smaller images. So I mentioned earlier, specifically there's lots of different instances of recursion in my novel, but the one that I was most interested in was the psychological one of the politician thinking about what the other person was thinking about, which brings us full circle to, the point that hopefully now there's enough context to make effectively, which is that I don't have an anxiety of influence around Gerard, because I feel like I came up with the same ideas myself in a coincidence manner, that I happened upon the same ideas, much like you and the the guy who made the movie Simulpathity, I feel like, you know, Gerard and I are these kindred spirits who over time came up with the same idea, as opposed to, you know, having that, you know, paralyzing influence of no longer, you know, needing to create literature because its central mystery is solved.
How is recursion and fractals related?
Well, with the interpersonal recursion idea that you, as you think farther and farther down this psychological chain of, in your desire for others to desire you and creating that chain of desire, you are psychoanalyzing people on increasingly back and forth levels, so that your thoughts eventually lose meaning. Because one of the key principles of recursion is we can only cognitively understand so many instances of it before it just starts.
I think it's 3.
You think it's 3?
Yeah.
I think it's maybe, I write in the book 6 to 7 for, like, you know, that would be somebody who probably has Asperger's around recursion, right? But I mean, I think I start around, I've thought a lot about this, and I think around 4 or 5, it really starts to break down for me.
Let me try this one on you. One of my favorites. I observe myself.
Right.
And I call it a self-observer.
Okay.
So when I start talking about my self-observer, I have to have a second self-observer to be observing the behavior of the first.
This is right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then, in order to be talking about the second self-observer, I need to have a third one that's watching the second one that's watching the first one.
Yes. And all of the reasons that you need those observers are because you interact with an outside world, which is why this is, if not identical, then extremely closely related to the idea I'm getting at with interpersonal recursion. I'm thinking about what you're thinking about, what I'm thinking about, what you're thinking about, what I'm thinking about, what you're thinking about. And it's just like this nested, embedded, self-similar repetition that is, by the way, inherent to our English language and almost all languages. There's a couple, like, very bespoke, not bespoke's the wrong word, but very, exceptions that are only spoken by a couple hundred people.
We got to have exceptions. That's no fun if we don't have them.
No fun if we don't have exceptions. But for almost all languages in this world, recursion is a central linguistic concept that a sentence can technically go on forever because you can always embed another clause. And when I define recursion, I in some ways, in looking, maybe I should use the word mimesis instead of recursion in some specific places. But when I define recursion, I'm talking about the really broad concept of embedded self-similar repetition of any kind.
The term self-similar is essential that we go over again, because it's fundamental to fractals and fundamental to what you're talking about.
Yes.
Self-similar is kind of an awkward word for me. I mean, it's gotten to be out there, but it means the next one is similar to the last one.
Yeah.
But I'm similar to myself. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
The phrase doesn't compute readily, but it's what's being used. So fractal is a repetition of a repetition of a repetition, where they're similar usually, but not the same. A clear fractal is one where it's a different scale, but the same pattern.
I was going to say the fractal is, a species within the genus of recursion, right? It's one specific type, and specifically what it is the embedded self-similar repetition of scale. And being
scale meaning smaller and larger, or larger
smaller and larger, but and that the smaller parts are miniature reflections of
the bigger part.
Yes.
Yeah. And what's happened in the fractal business is that they come up with like fractals that aren't exactly self-similar, that because of various mathematical permutations that can put into it, or whatever you might add, the next level at the different scale, or even the same scale, is somewhat different from what you might call the original. So it's approximate self-similarity. And one of the fun things about coincidences is how similar is similar.
That's right. And that's actually one of the most interesting concepts with, the true fractals actually hold less interest to me than the ones with slight variations.
Yes.
There's a line in my novel, nothing highlights difference quite like homogeneity. When you have these self-similar repetitions is when you you get into finer and finer and finer and finer grains of differentiation. And this is also why I was so taken with and wanted the novel to take place in the 1%, not only to lampoon it, but the farther you get up on the, socioeconomic class spectrum, the more differentiation is done based on increasingly nothing, right? Increasingly just these tiny microscopic gradations in
like
taste.
what flowers are you going to have at the wedding?
What flowers are you going to have at the wedding? And
oh, that's good.
And the more similar they all are, the more these tiny differences matter to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Not just, mathematically in a fractal, but in, psychologically and socioeconomically and, psychologically.
Now let's take that flower thing and bring it back to where our listeners and our viewers here a little bit for the reality that we tend to, most of us live in. That there is in your novel and in real life too, a search for a mirror of myself. I'm looking for someone who's going to be like me somehow. And that happens in the early stages of romance, where there is a clear mirroring. Even psychotherapists ran into that one. They could tell that we are meant to be together because we are so similar. We share this taste in turkey and stuff.
Well, similar but opposite. And this is part of the reason I love mirrors too, is that it's the same, but it's also the opposite. And you see that with romantic partners as well. Sometimes opposites attract, sometimes, it's more the similarity side of the equation, but mirrors to me are relevant on both counts.
Good. How is the opposite relevant as a mirror?
Well, because it's the inverted image.
The inverted version.
I actually read there was a really interesting article recently about, and again, to the selfie thing, I can't remember where it was. Maybe it was The Cut. I can't remember.
That's all right. It's all right.
Where
you're such a scholar. You're such a scholar. Okay.
The person who's writing it asks, why do we hate like pictures of ourselves, like selfies or pictures where, and it's because you're looking at the mirror. You're used to looking at yourself in the mirror, and the you that you're actually used to consuming as an other to imitate is your mirror image, not your actual self.
So right.
So then when you see photographs of yourself, you're not seeing the mirror image that you're used to seeing. You're seeing your part on the other side. You're seeing this slightly different person, and that difference alone repels us.
What do you do, Natasha, with the idea that in some new age thinking, which is kind of getting more in the culture, a person goes to the mirror in the morning. I know a guy who does this, and he looks in the mirror. I'm going to try to do this. And he looks in the mirror and he says, I love you. I love you. I love you.
My son does this. My son, I remember when he was like 18 months old, discovering the mirror and like putting his mouth all over it. We're imitative creatures, and we're programmed for. There's a reason the narcissist myth is so old, even though social media is so new. Part of it is, an ingrained memetic attachment, and there's very few things that are more memetic than our own image. We are like moths to a flame with it biologically. I think.
What do you think? What do you think of this? This guy is not 3 months, 6 months old, or
True.
he's in his 70s, and he does it every day. This is to you. This sounds like, to me, it sounds like to you, it's like just what we do, but now he's making it more conscious.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's definitely, you know more about this than me as a psychiatrist, for sure.
People have accused me of that a lot of times, and that's not true.
But
I mean, I know some. Go ahead.
There's a continuum of narcissism, right? And you need some portion of, and maybe we don't, and maybe narcissism is the wrong word on the other end of continuum. Maybe it's narcissism to self-love. And there's a certain amount of that that is healthy for confidence, for, you know, for getting through your day, for honestly, you need a certain amount of that to look away effectively. Because if you're, you know, if you're the more self-absorbed you are in kind of a I hate myself way, that's just as likely to draw you to the mirror as I love you. So you know, on that continuum of narcissism to self-love, he's probably a little too far on the narcissism spectrum, but I don't think he's, I mean, I'm not sure that it's clinical. You tell me.
Well, I look at it as the opposite of what you said, that he doesn't have enough sense of himself. That so he needs to be able to reinforce that for himself. Or it may be just as you're saying, it reinforces what's already there, is that you have to be, people have to be able to love yourself somehow to be able to love somebody else. You have to have some sense that you are lovable, and the person that you're living with is yourself. So you have to think you're okay with your lovableness.
With most things, I think these continuums are a circle too. And you probably need, you know, you need to not love yourself so much that you're able to walk away from the mirror, but you also need to love yourself enough that you're able to walk away from the mirror. Because if you hold up the picture again, I mean, this is the paperback, but the mirror is a trap. The mirror is a trap. And the more time, you know, we're there, the more we're likely, whether we see things we love too much or don't love enough, you know, we're going to be in trouble either way.
And that was narcissist's trouble, was that he was like caught in the trap. And in that trap, he could not get away from the pool. So that's where he had to stay in order to be able to do it. But we can carry our selfies around and look at it, and I have trouble watching myself on these YouTube things because it's seeing myself at it, and I get a little tired of it. But it's like there's a certain amount of it that we have to be able to do.
That's right.
In order to be able to keep going with this thing. What
we
about?
Still do too much. There are architectural things in our, you know, current mores around communication that overemphasize video, that I think are, you know, in particular social media, that are exacerbating some of these problems. The Zoom thing. I mean, I read somewhere recently too that like the Botox explosion since the pandemic, since people have been on Zoom all the time and staring at themselves all the time. It's like we're seeing actual behavioral changes because we are looking at ourselves all the time.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, Natasha, and two other things for us to discuss.
Okay.
As a therapist who deals with interpersonal problems, one of the fun things for me is recognizing that being a therapist is the only way to be in therapy without having to be the patient. That's a nice recursion for you right there.
I should have been a therapist, then I wouldn't have to be in so much therapy.
That's right. Well, it still helps, but the way it works. I mean, I learned this years ago, but the way that works is that the therapist should listen to what the therapist is saying to the other person, because there is a percentage of time that what the therapist is saying to the patient, the therapist needs to hear himself or herself.
which gets to like, there's recursive therapy too, right? I mean, Brene Brown has talked about this, how important her therapist is to her as, you know, a person who studies these things, and that you need like a special, like you would need a special therapist who treats therapists. And then what do the therapists who treat therapists do? Do they need a therapist who treats therapists who treats therapists? Like where, you know,
that's a really important idea that I think you're right about, because my therapist does not have a lot of experience with therapists, and I've been having to like help shape her to be a therapist for me. And it's taken a couple of years to be able to get to the place where I can kind of ask her to do stuff. For example, one of the failings of current therapy, most of them, is that they focus on the past or the present, but they don't talk about the images of the future that the person might be reaching for. There's a teleology in us that wants to go for something in the future, and you're kind of alluding to that we want to have an image of ourselves that we'd like to match, but there's also more to that. What kind of movie do I want to be in sometime in the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
And therapists don't really get to that kind of visual movie thing. For people with panic disorder, I maybe tell them they walk into the horror movie theater of their own mind when they have a panic attack.
I actually think the bigger problem is that oftentimes we're not even going for movies, we're going for photographs. And when, you know, a movie is idealized, but it's at least it's moving, right? Like you're going through time. There are, you know, changes. I think part of our problem is that we're not visualizing movies as our ideal. We have these still images, which are, you know, by their nature only, you know, they have the feeling of permanence, even though they're illusory. And it goes back to the Narcissus image too. I mean, if you listen to what Ovid says about him, he's, you know, charmed, spellbound by himself, no more moving than any marble statue. So part of what he's doing is he's freezing the movie.
Yeah.
And this goes to the immortality thing in time. What we're trying to do at the end of the day is stop time. And part of the reason it's not just narcissism that attracts us to selfies. What it is it's a play for immortality.
Well, that's so is the continuing belief that something of us survives after we die, right, which is kind of popular, and there's some evidence to suggest that it's true, but we won't get into that. It's pathological to want the photograph, is what you're saying, in this current reality. Now, I couldn't help do the movie thing, because my first came with movies when imagining running for touchdowns, or hitting the first pitch for a home run. So those are movies, and I would watch movies where that would happen.
But I think those movies are healthier than the still image.
That's what you're saying, and that's what I agree with you, and I'm glad you pointed out. But going back to the therapist thing, this mirroring thing that is so much of what we're talking about, not only does the therapist need to listen to what he or she is saying to the patient. I mean, I like your therapist, but also you have to listen to what the patient is saying, because as you did with the novelist, the desire novelist, and have run parallel with what he was doing, so there are parallels between the patient and the therapist. You can say there's it's not a coincidence that people have gotten together. In fact, there are some really amazing reasons that people start with each other. A good dissertation done in San Francisco was called Fated Meetings, where the patient came in with the same problems as the therapist had. Oh, wow. So the therapist really understood that. And there's another one of a patient writing a novel, which turned out to be about the therapist's life without having learned about it. So there are these parallels that you are experiencing within a novel that go between patient and therapist. So listening to what the patient is going through and thinking of it as something that might be a lesson to you is another one of those mirror coincidences that we are talking about today.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think part of the reason we're all more in need of therapy than ever is what we think we want is often very different from what we actually want. And it's a big theme in my book overall. But what we actually want most of the time is meaningful connection, and the therapist and the patient.
Yes. And a meaningful connection. And one of the purposes of the Coincidence Project, which has just gotten to be nonprofit status here in Virginia, is,
congrats.
Thank you, is like to learn to help people connect with each other, because coincidences can connect people with each other.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that is to be able to love and to be loved in return.
Yep.
To love and to be loved in return. And those are hard concepts for us human beings who are caught up in ourselves. And it's not to be in love. It's to know how to love someone else.
Well, when we say in love, that to me is usually the desire for desire. It's
That's
versus
good. That's good.
That is when we made that
Yeah.
Contrast between the desire for desire and love. We often use the word in love for that's that mania that drives you crazy.
Yeah.
That is the desire for
that
desire.
Is such a nice translation of being in love, the desire for desire from the other person. So
it's inherently recursive.
Oh gosh, we're not going to do that one right now, because I know you're right, but we're not going to do it. So we're getting to the end of our time together, and so I'd like to ask you to tell us something that's more personal about Natasha. It's something that's you. I know you're from University of Virginia, and right down the street from where I am right now. That you have a great friend named Gia, because I've seen you relate to each other. So I know those two personal things about, and you were met. I like that the two of you met walking into your first class in UVA or something like that, and that you try to be together as much as you can. Maybe I'm not getting it exactly right.
We met in our, actually, funny enough, in our sorority.
Oh, in the sorority.
Yes. Very intellectual.
And very early. Yeah,
quite early. I was a year ahead of her in school, but yes.
Oh, I didn't know that either. But you became very, very good friends, and still are. And she wrote a book that has Mirror in the title, and neither of you knew the other one was going to have a book with Mirror in the title, I guess.
No, I didn't know. Her book came out a couple of years before mine, but it was I can't remember if her book had already come out when it did happen around the same time, because it took me pretty long to finish my novel.
Okay, we get it.
She's a much more efficient, faster brain, faster writer.
Well, I mean, some people do whalers and they're not that fast, those boats, but they get to where they're going, and you did, and it's a wonderful novel. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And as you know, and I'll tell you again, how much fun it was to read it and read it again, and then be able to challenge you on your willingness to talk with people who write to you, and you did, and we have, and it's culminated in you're doing a lovely blurb for my book, and then in this conversation, which
I enjoyed it.
And I really, yes, I enjoyed it too. So you have a 3-year-old, you've told us about that. You live in Washington, DC.
I do.
And you're making you're trying to make a 4-part series out of the book here, out of the Portrait of a Mirror. And what else do you aspire to these days?
Well, I do have a second, and I have ideas for second, third, and fourth novels. The one that's farthest along is about probability in basketball, and I am very excited to hopefully, as soon as the pilot of the teleplay is off my desk, to dig in there. And
what do you think? What do you think about being in the zone in basketball?
In the zone in basketball, I mean, I think it's probably like being in a state of flow with anything else, where it's one of the most pleasurable. And I love this question, by the way, because it's going to put a wrapper on everything for us. It is one of the most pleasurable experiences that I think one can have, the state of flow. And that is because what it entails is a temporary loss of sense of self. What happens in order to get into a state of flow is that you detach from that desirous ego because you are so enmeshed in whatever you are doing. And so it can inherently only happen temporarily. I feel very fortunate to be someone who flow comes relatively easy to. I find myself in this state a lot. Not as much now that I have a 3-year-old because it's harder. The long blocks of time are really, really helpful to it. But yeah, no, I'm not a basketball player. My interest in basketball is largely mathematic, but I would imagine that it's, like anything else, and that you probably felt it on the football field when your entire world is part of that game. It's actually part of the reason that I could never get into sports, because I was always thinking about, like, what are people going to think of, like, how do I look in this, like, uniform? Like, is it fashion forward? I don't like how these, this, kilt feels. Like, I don't know. I could never enter a state of flow in sports, which is probably why I was bad at them. I imagine that everyone who's really good at it enters that.
What helped me get into flow in football was getting hit. Because that said, you're here. You're here.
You're there. It's a meditative thing, right? I think it's the best meditation there is. And for me, it happens very easily with writing. And it's part of the reason I love to do it.
Well, I like to do it too. And I'm having to do the business of this thing and do PR for my book is like not that much fun. I have 2 more books in mind too. And one is about my personal experiences with coincidence starting in 6th grade or 9 years old. And then the ones that are going on right now. And because it's so fascinating to see the flow of the flow. In basketball, I had one experience where the basket was really large and I couldn't miss. And I'm glad you put flow together with it, because I hope you get into the tension you must between the probability guys that say, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, or the random guys, and the guys who are actually playing say, hey, that guy's got the hot hand, and you can have hot hand, and
have a hot hand.
You can really go for it. It's just what happens.
That's right.
Well, Natasha, it's time to bid au revoir, and it's been a real delight talking with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.